Good morning and welcome to the 2020 Autism Hope Summit. On behalf of our STAR team, I'm delighted to welcome you to this exciting day of learning and connection. Thank you for joining us for this year's virtual event. I'd like to take a few moments to thank the entire STAR team who've worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring this virtual event to life. And a special thanks to all our presenters and exhibitors who'll be sharing their expertise and resources with you throughout the day today. This event and the STAR initiative were made possible through support from the University of Virginia's Strategic Investment Fund and by generous donors who are dedicated to making the world a better place for people with autism and their families. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Dr. Stephen Shore. Dr. Shore is a professor at Adelphi University and faculty member at NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. His work focuses on aligning best practices in supporting autistic people to lead fulfilling and productive lives. In addition to working with children and talking about life on the autism spectrum, Dr. Shore is an internationally renowned educator, consultant, and author on lifespan issues pertinent to education, relationships, employment, and self-advocacy. His most recent book, College for Students with Disabilities, combines personal stories and research for promoting success in higher education. Please join me in a virtual welcome of Dr. Stephen Shore.
Thank you, Mika, for a great introduction. And I am honored to be speaking at this second annual Autism Hope Summit conference. And let us begin by sharing my screen and bringing up my presentation. So here we go. This morning, I'm going to talk about what we can do to support autistic people in uncertain times, and particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we consider how to support autistic people to cope, we can also ask the question, are there things that we can do to promote people on the spectrum to thrive during this pandemic? Are there aspects of changes that we had to make that speak positively to the characteristics that autistic people have? So let us begin. Let us begin by talking a little bit about what brings me here to talk about autism to you. Taking it from the beginning, things were pretty typical at first. At 24 hours of age, my wife says I looked like an egg. Then at 18 months, like what happens to about 30% of us on the spectrum, I was struck with the regressive autism, where I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment. In brief, I became a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days. Where does autism come from? What do we do about it? Although now I am glad to see that people are asking the question, what can we do with autism as opposed to about autism? And what I mean by that is that there is increasing amount of acceptance and appreciation of autistic characteristics and what we can bring to society and our contributions because we are autistic. Well, it took my parents a whole year to find a place for diagnosis because there was so little known about autism. And when they did, now 2.5 years old, the doctor said they had never seen such a sick child and they recommended institutionalization. But fortunately, my parents, like we see so many parents today in ever increasing numbers, they advocated on my behalf and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year that my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program emphasizing music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. So what did my parents do? What was the breakthrough? Well, initially, they tried to get me to imitate them. And imitation is a time-honored educational strategy Just about everybody uses it at one time or another, but perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons, it can be hard for autistic people to imitate, especially when young. So my parents flipped it around, and then they imitated me. Once they did that, I became aware of them in my environment, and then they were able to move me along. And I believe the key implication is that in order to do meaningful work with an autistic individual, you have to meet them where they are. You have to meet us where we are, develop a trusting relationship, and then you can move on. And this is especially critical during these times where many autistic people are at home due to the pandemic, or at least spending more time at home. And parents have become unexpectedly de facto teachers of their children in education. And for those of us on the autism spectrum, again, spending more time at home with people, family members, perhaps roommates, and the importance of all of us just getting along. Well, with the work that my parents did, speech began to return at age 4. I believe that we have the technology, we have the know-how, we have the wherewithal so that autistic individuals leading fulfilling and productive lives can become the rule rather than the exception. And what that requires us to do is to turn away from the closed door of considering autism as a collection of deficits, disorder, and disability, and looking at the abilities of autistic individuals. And when we're able to do that, rather than autism being a bomb, rather than looking at the closed door of disability, disorder, and deficit, we look at the open door of ability. And rather than autism being a bomb, autism becomes da bomb. And how did that happen? Again, matching strengths and abilities. So a quick example, perhaps we have someone like Robert who might have been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, or these days now, autism spectrum disorder, needing supports at level 1. And we look at the characteristics of autism, again, so commonly described as deficits in communication, social interaction, restricted interest, and so on. But what if we just take that word deficits out and just consider them as differences? And considering what are the employment implications of those of us who use speech to communicate? Well, providing transportation system information to lost patrons, I would think that would need to be done in a detailed, factual, data-driven, truthful, and well, many of us do tend to be repetitive, but then again, how many times have you asked someone to repeat directions when you're lost? What about social interaction? A brief greeting, a request for directions, Robert's happy to deliver, and then people say goodbye. Where does Robert get this information? His coworkers have to look it up in a reference because trains and transportation system information is one of Robert's highly focused interests. Let's get away from restricted, but to highly focused, or maybe even just passion. He's memorized all this information. And as a result, because Robert is autistic, he outperforms his typical coworkers. And this is how we need to take a look at the characteristics of autism. And now that we have the overlay of the COVID-19 pandemic, the question will be, what are we going to do to support Robert so that he can continue to be successful doing his work, likely doing his work from home? So we're going to get into that a little bit later. So back to my situation. At age 4, I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. So things were looking better in the world. I discovered the wonderful world of watch motors. I was found by my parents taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, remove the gears, some of them, spin them around, have a good time with them, and then put it all back together again. The watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So what has always been curious to me is how could I have the fine motor control to take apart a watch? And then where did it go when it came to penmanship? Like so many of us, I was a penmanship disaster area. One of the worst things I could experience in school would be to walk into a room with a paragraph on the board, because what that meant is that we're probably going to have to copy it down. And by the end of the period, I had gotten through a few words and everybody else had gone to recess. My parents, upon noticing this, instead of looking at the closed door of disability, disorder, and deficit, they looked at the open door of ability and soon provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and to put back together again. Now, had this been today, I guess I would have pretty much lucked out because my parents were already doing this intensive home-based early intervention program of music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation, or at least that's what we would call it in today's terms. In those days, the concept of early intervention didn't even exist. So it was really just parents trying to desperately reach their child. So I was already home. Now I'd be home all the time. And then the questions are, what are we going to do to, number one, keep things the same as much as possible? Two, whatever changes have to be made, how are we going to communicate those changes in a way that the autistic person best understands? And then for my parents, what are they going to do in order to keep themselves calm, relaxed, and available and de-stressed as much as possible in order to support me? So these are some things that we're going to look at as we move along. So my parents provided all kinds of other devices to take apart and put together and supported my interest. And maybe in the future, I could have been a watchmaker or a waterman. At least at this time, it looked like that I would have still needed a lot of support and communication and also living as an adult. They made a big deal about this. They were building a sense of self-awareness, which is critical for eventually building a sense of self-determination, of being able to make good decisions as an adult based on what are your strengths and what are your challenges. Age 6, it was regular school kindergarten. I was a social and academic catastrophe. I guess repeating the letter B over and over again didn't endear me to my classmates. Now we know more about, number one, helping autistic individuals better interact with their classmates, and at the same time educating students and other people about what autism is and how to work and be with autistic individuals. Academically, I was about a grade behind in most of my subjects. I would spend most of my time in elementary school going into the library, getting all the books on my favorite subjects, reading them, taking notes, copying diagrams, sometimes even wondering if there was more to school than just reading my favorite books, such as reading in groups or doing math with other people. However, I think what this translated to is that teachers didn't quite know how to reach me, but since I wasn't a behavior problem, they just kind of left me in the back of the room to do my own thing. And in those days, it was probably for better rather than for worse. So let's take a look at what we can do to support individuals on the autism spectrum during COVID-19. First, let's take a look at a situation where we have Greg, an elementary school pre-verbal child on the spectrum, and he's just fascinated with balls. If there's a ball anywhere in the room, even if it's in a closed drawer and it's not visible, somehow he'll find it and he'll throw it. That's all he wants to do. You attempt to remove the ball or keep it away from him, you get a catastrophic meltdown. It only happens with this particular object. It's written in Greg's educational plan that all balls be kept out of sight. His teachers aren't always successful. As a result of Greg's behavior around these objects, he's considered one of the school's most difficult students. So why is Greg engaging in these, with this object and these behaviors? Is there a way that we can work it out so that Greg can be in the same room as a ball without being so distracted by it and getting in the way of teaching him? What could we do to implement the plan? What can we do to increase social interaction with this object? So commonly what I've seen is that this object, balls, will be identified as a reinforcer for Greg. And a plan will be set up where if Greg does this, then he gets access to that. So we take away the balls and only present them if Greg earns them. And a lot of the time it works, but for Greg, no, it doesn't work. He could get through one cycle. Greg does some work, then we take a break with the balls, then we take the balls away, and then nothing else can happen. So let us think more about working with Greg's characteristics. He's got this curious interest about balls. Maybe what I would do is I would come into the room with a whole sack of balls, big ones, little ones, different colors, different materials, sizes, various dimensions. And the first thing I do is I'd pull one of these objects out and hand it over to him. Say, here, Greg, have a ball. He'd take it and he'd throw it. He'd do that a number of times. Maybe I'd start holding the ball close to my face so he at least orients to me. Eventually, maybe I could use this object to work with Greg to teach him color identification, categorization, maybe giving the ball to another person, maybe going to another person and accepting a ball, maybe counting them, maybe throwing them in a trash barrel, precursor of cleaning up a room, or basketball. And in that way, instead of being the taker or awayer of this favorite object, I now become the supplier of this object. And the work that we do now becomes intrinsically reinforcing because we are now working with his focused interest. Well, it is the pandemic and schools are closed, perhaps now in a more of a hybrid type model. What are you going to do to what I call address the big three? What are we going to do to maintain and adjust Greg's schedule at home, keeping things the same as much as possible? Well, Greg is a pre-verbal child. He probably has pictures around his home, maybe taped up to the wall, maybe in a book. And perhaps these pictures delineate his schedule for the morning, from getting up out of bed, washing up, eating, and doing whatever home routines that Greg engages in at home. And that's all well and good. Let's keep it that way. Well, things are going to change when it comes time to go to school. Maybe Greg takes a bus. So there's a picture of a yellow school bus that he always takes at 8:15, stops by the front of his house. Maybe he gets driven to school. Maybe he walks to school, whatever it is. Well, that's going to change. Instead of there being a picture of, say, a yellow school bus, maybe now there's a picture of a desk with a computer where he does his work at home, learning remotely. And in that way, we are adjusting his schedule. Schools tend to have opening routines at the beginning of the day. So for example, I spent some time at a school where the day would start by sitting in a semicircle on little rug mats facing a wall. On the wall, there was a huge poster of a home, and next to it, a big poster of school. And so each student would be called in turn, and that student would get up, peel his picture with a nice ripping sound because it was Velcroed to the big poster of home, and he'd move it over to the poster of school. This indicated that he was in school. Maybe this activity could be generalized to the home where the family checks in before they go off to do whatever they need to do. And schools tend to keep a schedule, various classes during the day, perhaps a break, snack break in the morning, lunch break, and so on. And then it's time to go home. But instead of going home, well, he's already at home. Now he gets up from the computer where he's learning and goes to another part of the house. So that's an example of adjusting the schedule by keeping it as much the same as possible. Well, the second of the big three is communication. What are we going to do to communicate changes in the best way that Greg understands? Well, he is pre-verbal, which means he's using other means of communication. And let's just keep using those means of communication. And for parents who are unsure of the best way to communicate with Greg, talk to his teachers, talk to his therapists, and likewise to get the school schedule at home. This is something that you've probably already done quite extensively now that we're 9 months into the pandemic. However, it's always good to check in with the teacher to get additional ideas. And then the third of the big three is self-care. What are you going to do to take care of yourself so that you can support Greg? And that brings back to when I used to travel before the pandemic. I was traveling to a different country about once a month to talk about autism. I had visited 51 countries by the time the pandemic struck, and when it becomes safe to travel, I'll be working to push that number upwards. So what can you do to take care of yourself? What relaxes you? Well, let's take a look. So the big three: maintaining routines, adjusting when needed, clear communication, and self-care, taking a break. So sometimes you just need to take a 1-minute break. You just stop what you're doing. You exhale slowly and deliberately. You inhale. You think about inhaling calm from the environment, and you exhale stress. And you run that 3 or 4 times, and that's probably going to relax you. And just like the airline attendants would tell us before the plane took off with the safety announcement, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first before helping others, because if you don't, you probably end up passing out, and then you can't help anybody. So this is another situation of where you've got to help yourself so that you can be available to support, in this case, support someone like Greg. So what are some resources that are out there? One of them is Learn Autism. This is an organization that I got involved with, and I find it very helpful. They're parent-driven. It's a mix of experts in the autism community and veteran parents on how to best support autistic individuals. So let's take a quick look.
Hi, I'm Hasna. I'm Faisal's mom. He's 12 years old and has autism.
Hi, I'm Alison. I have a son called Noah who is 9 years old and has autism.
Hi, I am Stephen Shore, and I am autistic.
Learn Autism is the ultimate companion, helping you navigate your family's autism journey.
There are fortunately a lot of different therapies for working with individuals with autism.
Learn Autism is simple, clear, and relatable.
My name is Adrienne Robeck. I'm a licensed psychologist and a board-certified behavior analyst.
Learn Autism is the masterclass for autism.
Productive lives are very possible for autistic individuals, and one way to frame these productive lives is through the 4 A's of autism.
Learn Autism's goal is to provide a trusted resource that is both affordable and accessible.
Just with these cards alone, we've already worked on receptive language and expressive language. Here are some top tips to keep you sane during the holidays.
When we all started this journey, there wasn't the information available to us. we have this information, we can share that and compartmentalize it so that people don't have to go through what we've been through.
I invite you to learn autism.
I invite you to learn autism.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I invite you to learn autism.
So useful information presented in bite-sized bits, like 2-minute video. For education, a lot of parents have become de facto teachers, and education companies are offering free subscriptions and access to the materials due to school closings. There's dozens, I think even now hundreds of organizations. And if you click on this link that you see below, then you'll find plenty of resources. As you see here, yes, hundreds. We're getting into the thousands now. Different grades, categories, and so on, in order to give you the best information possible to help educate your child. So anyways, let's go back to where we were. Oh, back to the beginning. No, we already went through that. Okay, there we go. So that's another resource that can be very helpful. Moving along, here I am at age 8. I would spend hours cracking open small rocks with a big rock. I was fascinated by the shiny specks inside, the sharp edges. That eventually grew into a special interest in geology, geography, many others, including astronomy. I remember one day I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk, and a teacher told me that I'd never learned how to do math. But somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the university level. Now, the good news is that more educators now would notice this as a special interest and find a way to teach mathematics through astronomy. There's plenty of math in astronomy. Bicycles started becoming interesting to me. I got to a point where I could take a bicycle apart down to ball bearings and get that back together again. And maybe now it could have looked like that I could be a bicycle mechanic, or maybe run a bicycle shop. And I bring this up because as we're educating students on the spectrum, we also need to be thinking about what are their interests, what are their strengths, and what can we do to parlay those interests and strengths into possible areas of study, and then later on, avocations and vocations. Everybody learns better about what they're interested in. If they're interested in something, they're probably good at it too. For those of us on the spectrum, another characteristic, we tend to be a study of extremes, which means the things that we're good at, we're incredibly good at. The things we're not so good at, well, that could be quite a challenge, and we may need a lot of support. So while I do promote a strength-based approach or abilities-based approach for thinking about autism, we do have to be realistic about the very real challenges that do come with being autistic. If those challenges didn't exist, we wouldn't be here trying to figure the whole thing out. At age 10, I was awfully concerned about the letter E. I heard you have to drop E before adding ing. Well, wasn't this E going to get hurt when it fell to the ground? I had a friend who said he felt like a pizza. He didn't look like one, he didn't smell like one, so there were some issues there. I remember a class session being interrupted by an announcement. The principal had lost his mother. Well, what does that mean? Made me think of what my parents would tell me when I lost something. They'd say it was in the last place you left it. I thought that was a silly thing to say, because if I knew that, I wouldn't be asking them in the first place. However, I thought if my parents provided me this advice thousands of times, maybe I could be helpful to the principal, who I liked, if he thought it really hard as to where he last saw his mother. Well, it didn't go over well at all. If it looks like we're being rude, talking back, being disrespectful, maybe that we're just interpreting the world literally. And that's another characteristic. We interpret the world very literally. And it may be because we have difficulty perceiving the up to 93% of communication that is non-verbal, leaving us with only words, which is as little as 7%. Middle and high school, you don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school. But for me, it was actually easier because I figured using words instead of sound effects from the environment really helped with social interaction. I also realized that, I should say, I also was able to engage in my highly focused interest of music. I joined the band. Now I had a structured activity in which to mediate my interactions with others. I got so taken up with music that I got it into my head that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments. So I spent hours in the instrument closet. Nothing that we could do today, given the pandemic. We can't even get to school to get into that instrument closet. Certainly playing instruments or singing various music ensembles, it's not really safe to do that right now. So I would have to have satisfied my interest in other ways, maybe having a collection of instruments at home. So anyways, eventually the pandemic will end and we'll get back to being in school like we have been, and we can enjoy music again in middle and high school. So middle and high school is where we often start seeing courses, clubs, and activities based on particular interests. So that's one of the silver linings of middle and high school. So anyways, I'd spend hours in that instrument closet, figuring out all the different instruments, taking them apart, putting them together, sometimes recombining 2 or 3 of them in ways that never should have seen the light of day. And while I didn't learn all the instruments, I did get it up to about 15. And then when I heard that a requirement for a degree in music education was that you had to learn all the instruments, well, that just seemed to be the thing to do. And that's exactly what I did when I went off to college. So music, in addition to the therapeutic benefits of engaging music, is a great way to parlay an interest into developing relationships with others and being involved with the community as a musician. However, music is a very sensory activity, and I remember having a lot of challenges in jazz band, being a trombone player, seated in front of the trumpets that were just way too loud, and nobody understood much about autism, and certainly nothing about sensory issues then. So I ended up just skipping a lot of jazz band rehearsals. And nobody could figure out why, even though I was telling them directly why, the trumpets were too loud. Even going into the band director's office with a set of alternate seating charts and demanding he make a change, well, that didn't work either. However, I know a lot more about effective self-advocacy that we're going to get into later today when I give my presentation during the second session. So music, one of the reasons that I give music lessons to children on the spectrum is that in addition to all of those therapeutic benefits, music is just plain old fun. Also, I haven't figured out how to teach typical kids yet, so I just stick with the ones on the autism spectrum. They make a lot more sense. So speaking of school, let's take a look at Arvind the artist and developing social interaction with his interests. A middle school student with limited speaking ability, he spends hours drawing shapes using crayons on big pieces of paper. He's been doing this ever since he was a small child. People have not been successful in perhaps getting him away from this interest, as it seemed to be interfering with doing everything else. So now, Arvind's teachers just let him sit in the back of the room and draw with his crayons and paper. Is a sort of what I call geographical inclusion. And what I mean by that is that he's in the same space, but he's not interacting with the class. Some people call that inclusion. I call it geographical inclusion. For inclusion to be successful, both Arvind, the autistic person, and his classmates need to benefit from their being together. So what can we do to help Arvind? Well, I was called in to consult for a child very much like Arvind. And as I entered the house, there he was drawing on his big piece of paper using crayons. So instead of taking that away and making him do something to earn it back, I sat on the other end of the piece of paper and I started drawing. And he gave me a look and then he went back to his work. And I found that I could draw alongside him. I could even connect my drawings with his drawing. He didn't mind. I could even color in places where that he left blank. And he was okay with that. I wanted to see how much he could communicate. I held up a crayon. I asked him what color it was. He identified the color. He did that with other colors. So he had his colors and he could communicate them. I could pick up a color, ask him what a crayon, ask him what color it was, and then give it to him. He would take it from me and then he'd use that color to draw. I could also ask him to pick up a certain color crayon and give it to me to draw. So clearly, like what we saw with Greg, like what my parents did with me, developing a relationship or interaction with Arvind, meeting Arvind where he was, joining him so that we can then learn things together, seemed to be the way to go. And maybe this is something that Arvind's teachers or therapists could do at school. Well, he's not at school because schools are closed. So what are we going to do to maintain and adjust Arvind's schedule at home? So like with Greg, his morning routines are probably pretty much the same, but things change when it comes to school. And now he's sitting in front of a computer doing his schoolwork as opposed to actually going to school. Arvind has some speaking ability, so I think picture word schedules would be most helpful to him in communicating changes in the best way that Arvind understands. Self-care, what can you do to care for yourself so that you can support Arvind? And another facet of these self-care strategies is that they are things that you can teach autistic individuals as well. So they work just as well for us as they do for anybody else. So taking a short yoga break. Breathe in and you clench your fist. You take a long breath out, you release your hands. And you do that 3 times. And that's probably going to relax you quite a bit. If you need more, you can breathe in and press your hands together in a prayer position. And then when you breathe out, you pull your hands apart. So some more strategies. Over in Ireland, we have a social story developed by Amanda McGuinness. She has other resources as well. This is a story that you can download from her website talking about what the coronavirus is. And again, just go to her website. It's one of many free and available resources for people who are still getting used to and are coping and eventually thriving in the COVID-19 pandemic. So I talked about thriving. Is there anything positive about the COVID-19 pandemic for those of us on the autism spectrum? Well, some of us actually communicate better using the computer, communicate better by written word or by text as opposed to face-to-face. And part of that reason might be is many of us have such a hard time decoding and perceiving nonverbal cues that they become distracting. And we spend a lot more energy trying to figure out these social nonverbal communication cues than other people that we don't have enough cognitive energy to focus on whatever is being discussed. Also, communication, just as what we're doing now, tends to be temporal in time, which means we say it and then it's gone. But communicating electronically through written word, typing, or even like this, because I did hear during the introduction that these presentations are being recorded. So that means you can go back and watch them again to make sure you have, you get all the information you want to get out of them. And that speaks well to those of us on the autism spectrum. So in a way, this communicating in this way due to the pandemic can be helpful to many autistic individuals. Resources from autistic individuals, autistic people ourselves. Jean Holverstadt, she's an autistic person, and she's got 19 tips, 19 helpful tips to maintain your mental and physical health. And again, go to her website and you'll get a lot of good information. And similarly, Next for Autism has increasing numbers of webinars and other information to help keep you structured, whether you're an autistic person and you need support in structuring your day, or if you are supporting an autistic person, what can you do to help that person structure their day? And also for you, how can you best structure your day now that you are working from home instead of going to work? So we continue with my story. At age 19, I was off to college. College was a utopia. I had more friends. If I wanted to ride my bicycle at midnight, I could find someone just as strange as I was to also ride at midnight. Dating occurs in college, and that was nothing that I could really figure out. My first encounter in undergraduate school, after spending a lot of time with this lady, she suddenly told me that she likes hugs and back rubs. Well, I guess that has a particular meaning, but what that meant to me was, well, gee, I've got this brand new friend and she doubles as a source of deep pressure like a Temple Grandin squeeze machine. Well, I guess she had other ideas. And after a lot of conversation, I realized that she wanted to be my girlfriend. Well, I wasn't interested in dating or having a girlfriend then. So we kind of split off. However, the experience did teach me that there is this whole area of communication we call nonverbal, which then became another focused interest. And I would spend hours reading books on body language, nonverbal communication, dating for dummies, and so on, building a lexicon of nonverbal communication. So now we're in graduate school, and I'm spending a lot of time with this lady, initially reviewing each other's homeworks, and then doing things socially. Shortly thereafter, at a beach very much like this, she suddenly gave me a kiss, a hug, and held my hand. Well, now I have the social story down. If a woman kisses you, hugs you, and holds your hand all at about the same time, it probably means they want to be your girlfriend. And if that's the case, you better have an answer right away. And the answer could either be yes, it could be no, or it could be further investigation and analysis as indicated. Well, it seemed to be a good thing to do. And we've now been married for over 30 years. And if you want to find out more about what life is like on her side of the spectrum, I encourage you to read her contributions to my autobiography. Well, even dating has changed during the pandemic. We can't go out and date and see people like we're used to doing. We have to keep physically distant. And I focus on the word physical, not social. The common term that people use is socially distant. Well, if we're trying to keep socially distant, it means that you don't want to talk to anybody. You want to isolate yourself. And I don't think that's what is meant when we're using this term. So it makes more sense to use the word physical distance. We're focused on keeping 6 feet apart or safe distances apart from people as we socially interact, not becoming hermits. So physical distance. So dating can still occur, but initially it seems to be more electronic or using a computer as opposed to actually seeing people, at least in the beginning. So that's a change that we have to go through as well. So I spend most of my time now in a sheltered workshop for people with Asperger syndrome, where we spend months, years, lifetimes perseverating topics that most people don't want to hear about, but we talk about them anyways. Sometimes social interaction between community members could be improved. Some people refer to this place as a university. If you want to find undiagnosed people on the spectrum, just check out your professors. Well, let's take a look at Robert. Remember Robert from the beginning. He's the fellow who provides transportation system information to lost patrons in a busy train station, and Penn Station to be specific. And he loves his job. He's been doing it for 4 years. He's flawless, never makes a mistake. However, he talks a little bit too fast, maybe a lot too fast. And patrons expressed frustration at not being able to keep up with Robert's directions. They can't write it down fast enough. They can't remember it fast enough. So what could we do as Robert's supervisor to share direction information at a slower speed? What can we do to implement this plan? So some strategies might be to role play the speed that Robert needs to speak at. Maybe the supervisor could talk at the same speed as Robert does and see if Robert can remember and retain the information. Maybe sticky notes that Robert sticks up near his in his station where he works. And these are some strategies that Robert's supervisor could engage in to help Robert slow down. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has struck, and Robert is working from home via Zoom, just like with you, just like I teach all of my courses at the university, just like I give presentations, just as I'm doing now. So what can we do to maintain and adjust Robert's schedule at home, keeping things the same as possible? Well, I know for me, in March, when we all got booted off of campus, I realized that I needed to be much more intentional about my movements. And what that means is that we all get incidental exercise during the day. Some of us even count the steps we take, trying to get to that magic 10,000 number. Some of us get there, some of us don't. And I realized no longer am I riding my bicycle between work and home and to run errands. No longer am I sitting in my office and then getting up to walk to the dean's office or to a classroom where I'm going to teach a class, or to walk to an area on campus to get something to eat. But it's really just being at home, walking as far as a room that's been dedicated to where I do my work. So barely even 50 feet. So what can I do to make sure I get proper exercise? What I do is I get on my elliptical bike and I spin that every other day, usually for about 90 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. And that way I make sure that I get sufficient exercise. And that's probably something that Robert should consider as well. If he's not going outside in a safe manner, getting exercise, if he's not getting the incidental exercise that he would get commuting to and from work, and just walking around at work during breaks and during lunch, for example. So that's an adjustment that has to be made. Robert also needs to make sure that he maintains boundaries between work and home. I have a friend of mine, he's not on the autism spectrum, but he also does all of his work from home. And he works these insane hours because he's having a hard time maintaining a boundary between work and home. Or I should say the rest of the place where he lives. So he's working late into the night, can't seem to stay away from his work, and maybe a designated times, certainly designated times, and if possible, a designated place where work takes place. And then when he's not working, Robert is doing something else. What about making sure that Robert maintains his schedule? Well, Robert is quite verbal. He speaks very well. Maybe he has a written schedule somewhere hanging on the wall, for example. Maybe he uses pictures too. Whatever helps him keep his schedule the same as much as possible. It's also important for Robert to make sure that he maintains contact with his coworkers and with his supervisor. So a supervisor can still support Robert over the phone or through Zoom as well. Communicating these changes, again, Robert speaks very well, so through the spoken word probably works, and certainly written reminders that he can paste around near his computer screen to continue to talk slowly. What can Robert do to maintain his calm? Well, I showed you a couple of strategies. He could also engage in this third strategy, which is sometimes just sitting back and observing the world around you without engaging in the world around you. And this is also a meditative technique that can also be helpful. I've just described 3 ways in which one can take care of yourselves, where you can take care of yourselves, but there's many, many other strategies. Maybe if taking a bubble bath with a rubber ducky is something that helps you relax, then well, that's exactly what you do. More strategies. Middletown Center for Autism out in Ireland. They've got some great ideas and strategies on their website. There's a great book on that's on PDF titled Community Heroes online. You can go to this website, and this helps describe, just like that social story that I showed you a little bit earlier, this book has more details on exactly what coronavirus is and what we can do to be safe. And you can either download the PDF or you can just view it on their website. Organizations such as Autism Speaks, Autism Society of America, and many others have increasing amount of information to help you cope and thrive on during this pandemic. I've also got these 10 ways that can be helpful to cope and thrive during the pandemic when your routines are disrupted. This is taken from a video that was made by an autistic colleague of mine, friend colleague, Dina Gassner, Self-Care for Autistics. So adapted from this video, let's take a look at these 10 things that can be done. One is, as I described a little bit of it earlier, is that it's important to remain connected with your family, support people, colleagues, and others who are important to you. So for example, there are some friends and colleagues that I talk to every single day. They call me on the phone or I call them. No longer can we rely on what I call incidental connections. And those incidental connections occur when you go to the store to buy something and a neighbor or a friend happens to be there too, and you just bump into them and you interact, or perhaps walking around outside or going to a park. There's much less of that. So you have to be much more intentional in connecting, and doing so either by phone, instant message, social media, Zoom, just like this, or whatever means that works for you in order to remain connected. And this is both for autistic individuals and also for, well, everybody else as well. It's important to be aware of the possibility of fusing with or absorbing anxiety from others. And especially for those of us on the autism spectrum, there is this myth that we don't perceive or have emotions. However, many of us on the spectrum, if anything, we perceive other people's emotions more strongly than others. However, we're not always quite sure what to do with it, how to identify it. That can cause us to be overwhelmed and possibly even shut down as a result. And when we express our emotions, sometimes they're expressed differently from the way others expect. So those behaviors or actions get missed or misinterpreted as just not having emotions. And I know for me, if I feel an emotion that's out of context with the environmental situation, I need to look around and ask, for example, my wife, are you feeling particularly anxious about something right now? And often I'll find out that she is. And in that way, I'll be able to then separate myself from her, whatever that emotion is, and then feel empathy or sympathy for her, as opposed to thinking that's coming from me. And these may be emotions that are coming from friends, colleagues, possibly from watching too much TV, news, and so on. So sometimes you just got to take a break. You definitely have to plan things out and plan things out differently. Plan A, for me, was going to work and teaching as well professors do and doing other things that we do at the university. Plan B is, well, those same things still have to get done, but they're all done online. So that's plan B. Shopping is not done spontaneously anymore, but they're now planned out in detail. Usually my wife and I go once a week shopping early in the morning before many people get there. We wear our protective equipment and we do a huge shopping, and that's it for the week. The outside can be very restorative. And it's important to get out on a regular basis and to do so in a safe manner. So wearing your protective equipment, gloves, mask, whatever you need to do, maintaining a safe physical distance, not social distance, but physical distance from others. So people who like to go for walks and have been doing so before the pandemic, people who like to run or jog or ride a bicycle, certainly keep doing that. Just make sure you do it in a safe manner. It's also important to recognize that keeping safe during COVID-19 requires more cognitive energy. So again, doing things outside is not spontaneous anymore, but you always have to take precautions, make sure you're safe, you have proper equipment, masks. If you don't have a mask, you can improvise a mask. And there are many videos on YouTube that show you how to make a mask out of a towel, an old t-shirt, or various other materials. And that's what you do if you don't have a mask. And it just takes more cognitive energy to do that. So before you'd go out, you go shopping, you come back, that's about as much time as you'd spend. Now, when you go out, anything that comes back has to be quarantined or disinfected. And all of that takes more time, takes more cognitive energy. So you may not be as productive as you were pre-pandemic. Pandemic is a stressful time. And a lot of us are engaging in activities that maybe we haven't done for a long time. So as an autistic person, I haven't done these self-stimulatory behaviors in a long time, spinning a spinner or around this old stuffed cat and squeezing it. However, I think we'll be much better off if we reframe these activities as self-regulatory behaviors. And everybody engages in these self-regulatory behaviors. Anybody who sat in a chair and bounced your leg is self-regulating, either up-regulating to make sure you stay awake or down-regulating to help relieve anxiety. And whether you're autistic or not, maybe you're drawn back to a TV series that you haven't watched in years. Maybe you are carrying around an old stuffed cat that you haven't even thought about in a long time, or you're engaging in other activities. It's not a regression, but it's coping. And as long as it's not getting in the way or being to a person's life, then continue doing that to help you cope. It's important to take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And in doing so, whatever you need to do to relax, whether it's one of the activities that I suggested a little bit earlier, whether it's watching a certain TV show or cartoons that you haven't looked at in a long time, or even, as I mentioned before, taking a bubble bath with a rubber ducky. If that relaxes you, then, well, then that's what you should do so that you can take care of yourself and take care of others as needed. It's also vitally important to maintain personal health. Doctors are still working, but it's harder to see a doctor. Certainly you have to take all the precautions you always take. And some doctors are not seeing people unless it's an emergency. And if you're on medication, maybe getting, for example, getting a pill organizer, like you see here, can also be helpful. When going outside, gloves and masks as needed. And certainly bring as little as possible outside, because whatever goes outside has to be quarantined or disinfected when you come back inside. And so what that means is that whereas before I'd often go out with my rucksack, maybe I'd have my computer in there, various other things, and I wouldn't think twice about bringing it out and bringing it back in. Well, now I go out with a very slimmed down number of possessions. One credit card, my license, whatever cash I think I might need, and whatever keys I need to get back into the house, or if I'm driving, certainly car keys, and that's it. And that way I don't even bring my wallet, because again, what goes out has to be quarantined or disinfected when it comes back in. And we're going to take a look at some protocols for when you return home and safely accepting items. As I mentioned before, less is more. Everything you take out has to be brought back. Everything brought back has to be disinfected and quarantined, and that also includes things that are delivered. So that can also be a plan B when it comes to shopping. Plan A is you go out and shop like you always do. Plan B, if you don't feel it's safe to go out, then you have food or whatever you order delivered. But still, that has whatever is delivered has to be brought in a safe manner and disinfected. So items that aren't food can just be left to sit in a designated place for up to 3 days. And then I attend to them. Food, some food can be quarantined if they're non-perishables. Those are easy. Some you can wash in warm soapy water, various fruits and other food. Some soap you just can't, some food you just can't wash. I guess a chocolate cake you can't wash very well. And let's see, it looks like my computer's doing some weird things, so I've got to go back, see if I can. So some food just can't be sanitized, such as chocolate cake, for example. That wouldn't do well in a sink of warm soapy water. So you've just got to be as careful as possible, perhaps clean the outside, the container of that cake, whatever that cake is in, and that can also help. Having a set of shoes and clothes for outside versus inside. So when we come in, we leave shoes, not in the garage, but near the front door where we come in, and they just stay there. And those are the outside shoes. Then we change into inside shoes. Outside clothes, such as jackets. It's getting cold out now, so you're gonna have to start wearing jackets and eventually hats and gloves to keep your hands warm and so on. And those will just all stay in a place only to be used when we go outside. And then if they sit there for 3 days or more, then they're considered as clean and they could be moved to the inside of the house. Protocol for safely coming back, take a shower. And what we do is we drop the clothes directly into the washing machine. If that's not convenient, you can drop them to the floor and just leave them there until they've gone through their quarantine period of time. Take your shower, scrub down, get into clean clothes, and then you're ready to carry on as always. And again, like I mentioned before, you may need to reduce expectations. You just can't do as much as you're used to being able to do pre-pandemic because you're spending so much time and energy making sure that you remain safe. So these are some of the things that I think about as an autistic person who is coping with the COVID-19 pandemic and doing what I can to thrive during the COVID-19 pandemic and looking at the positives. So for example, because my university is in New York, but I actually live in Boston and my wife is in Boston. Previously, I would spend about half my time at home in Boston, the other half in New York, and the third half traveling to conferences, and somehow those three halves added up to a whole. Now we're spending unprecedented amounts of time living together in the same house. But fortunately, we like each other, we like each other's company, and it's working out very well. And we're also learning a lot about cooking good tasting and healthy meals as well. Well, I want to thank you all for what you're doing in keeping autistic people and yourselves safe during the pandemic, and in a broader sense, doing what you do to make fulfilling and productive lives for autistic individuals the rule rather than the exception. And I look forward to coming back to you later today to talk about developing effective self-advocacy skills for those of us on the autism spectrum, and then moderating the panel of autistic self-advocates, just like myself, so that we can all learn more about supporting individuals on the autism spectrum. Thank you very much.